Hello friends, Namaskar, this is Sanjay. Welcome to part 5 of this video series, and in this part we will talk about Piaget, Kohlberg and Vygotsky's theories, how they are constructed and what are the criticisms of these theories. And this topic happens to be the 5th topic in the CTET CDP syllabus. In this video series we will be covering only those topics which are important from your exam point of view. We'll start with Piaget's theory of cognitive development. What are the various stages? We'll look at the concept of schema and the stages of adaptation. Then we'll go to Lev Vygotsky's ZPD, private speech and scaffolding. We will also look at what is make-believe play and its connection with self-regulation. And then we'll do a comparison between Piaget and Vygotsky's theories. Moving on to Kohlberg's theory of moral development, we will look at the stages of moral development. And finally, we will solve 5 sample questions from various previous question papers. So let's get started. Jean Piaget was a Swiss psychologist who was well known for his work on child development. He theorized how learners interact with their environment and develop reasoning and knowledge. As per his theory, cognitive development is categorized into 4 distinct stages. In Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, the 4 stages are sensorimotor stage, pre-operational, concrete operational and formal operational stages. Now sensorimotor stage is from birth to 2 years. At this age, the child is still learning to control his own senses and motor skills. That is, the child is learning to understand what is it that he is seeing or hearing and also to control his own body. And this is also the beginning of cognitive understanding because the child is still very young. Next, the pre-operational stage is from 2 to 7 years. And this is when the child has slightly grown up and is in an egocentric state. Egocentric means the child thinks that he or she is the most important person in the world and everything else around him exists only for his purpose or his usage. And they also believe in animism. That is, they think everything around them has life. For example, if the child hurts himself against a wall and the child is crying. So what parents do is they beat the wall and say, I have punished the wall now. So the child will be happy. That's because the child thinks that the wall is alive and because the parents are punishing the wall, the child is happy. So that is animism. And the child also has difficulty in understanding conservation. For example, if you give the child 1 chocolate and the child is crying that he or she wants 2 chocolates. And then you take the same chocolate, break it into 2 pieces and give it back. And the child thinks that now he has 2 chocolates. So that's because they don't understand what is conservation. And then they also develop symbolism. That is, now they can use language and words to represent things and objects and people. And they also develop a sense of moral realism. That is, at this stage, they know that there is something called right, something called wrong. Right? Because in the previous stage, they will do anything. Whereas here, they know that there are a few things that they should not do. And next comes the concrete operational stage, which is from 7 to 12 years. Now in some books, it is written as 7 to 11 years, which is also correct. So that is a minor difference. You should not get worried about that. Now in the concrete operational stage, the child learns how to use concrete objects and situations for logical thinking. That is, if you ask the child to solve some problem, if it is a physical problem represented by physical objects, the child is able to solve, such as a puzzle. And the child also understands the concept of conservation. That is, now if you break the same chocolate into 2 pieces and give it to the child will not be convinced because now the child understands what is conservation. And the child is also able to do grouping in and ordering using various attributes. For example, in the previous stage, if the child was just using one attribute, that is, if the child was just segregating a group of blocks only on the basis of colors, right? Now the child can segregate or separate the group of objects on various parameters such as all red blocks, all green blocks, all red colored balls. So that way the child can use 2 or multiple parameters to separate or group objects. And finally, the formal operational stage. This is pretty much very close to adulthood, right? And here the child is able to understand abstract thought. Now the child can solve mental puzzles and not just physical puzzles. And the child is also able to deal with complex situations. So these are the 4 stages of Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Next, let us look at an interesting concept called schema. Jean Piaget says that schema is the basic building block of intelligent behavior. Now, what is a schema? Schema is nothing but a way of organizing knowledge. Think of it as a filing system, because whenever you have any existing knowledge, you have stored it in the form of a schema in your brain. And whenever you get any new information, you are either going to add it to an existing schema or you are going to create a new schema for that. So schema is nothing but an idea or a way of understanding what things are and how do they fit with each other and how are they connected to each other. You must have come across diagrams like this. This is called a schematic diagram. In a schematic diagram, you have different components and there is a pathway to show how these different components are connected to each other. If I were to give you a real life example, look at this picture. As soon as you see this, you are able to identify that this is a plug. You know that this will be at the end of a long wire and it is associated with an electrical device. And you also know that this plug has to be put into an electrical socket and has to be switched on for the device to work. So how do you know all of this? Just by looking at one picture. That is because the first time that you used a device with a plug like this, you have stored the information about the various parts of the device, including information about the plug, in a schema in your brain. So you have stored it in the form of a schematic diagram in your brain. You know where does this component come in the device and what is it used for. So that way you have organized the information about a plug in your brain. So that is the concept of schema. This is another example of how we use a schema in our daily life. Suppose I'm going in a market and while walking on the road, I feel hungry. So what should I do? Should I just stand there and think to myself that I'm feeling hungry? No, what I will do is I will look for restaurants around me. Right? And once I go into the restaurant, I just can't directly start eating food. Right? I know that first I have to see the menu. And after seeing the menu, I have to decide. And then I have to place an order. And then I will receive the food. And after eating the food, I just can't directly exit. What I have to do next is I have to receive the bill. I have to go to the counter and pay the bill. So how do I know so many things that are associated with this feeling of feeling hungry? That is because all of these are things that I have done in the past. Maybe somebody took me to a restaurant when I was a kid and I saw people looking at the menu and ordering food. I know I must have seen my parents receiving the bill, going to the counter and paying the bill. So all these bits and pieces of information that I have assimilated or acquired over a long period of time, I have stored all this information in the form of a schema. So the next time I feel hungry, I see a restaurant, I know what are all the steps that I need to follow. So this is how the concept of schema is used in our day-to-day life. Next, let's talk about Jean Piaget's process of adaptation. Piaget says that whenever we come across a new situation, we start with a state of disequilibrium and then we assimilate some new knowledge or we accommodate some new knowledge and then we reach a stage of equilibration. For example, if I have traveled only by bus or train, then I know that I need to buy a ticket, then I need to go to the bus stand or the railway station and board the bus or the train. So that is my current schema. Now when I go to the airport for the first time, then I'm stopped at the gate because I need to produce an ID proof. And that is a state of disequilibrium because my existing schema does not allow me to deal with the situation. And when I get into the airport, I have to do the check-in, I have to get a boarding pass, I have to get the baggage tag, I have to go through the security check. So all these are new things that I have not done in the past. Therefore, this new situation is leading to disequilibrium. And then I assimilate some new knowledge into my current schema because my current schema says that tickets are enough to travel. But when I'm boarding the plane for the first time, I know that ID proof and check-in and boarding pass, all these are also required. So I'm adding this information also into my current schema. Next, I also accommodate some new knowledge into my existing schema. For example, my existing schema says that I can carry anything that I want in my baggage because when I'm going into a bus or boarding a train, nobody's checking my hand baggage. But when I'm going in a flight, I have to make sure that I'm not carrying any power banks in the hand baggage. I have to make sure that I'm not carrying any sharp objects in my hand baggage. So I have to accommodate, or I have to change my current schema, which says that I can carry anything. I have to change it to tell myself that these are things that I cannot carry in my hand baggage if I am traveling by flight. Therefore, I assimilate some information and I accommodate some information. And after that, I reach a stage of equilibration, because the second time that I travel, I have gone through all of this in the first time. So I know what needs to be done. So I am not in a state of disequilibrium, right? I am in a state of equilibration because now I'm an experienced traveler. So Piaget's process of adaptation says that whenever we come across a new situation, then we go into disequilibration, and then we have to assimilate some knowledge or accommodate some knowledge, and then we reach a stage of equilibration. Next, let us look at some criticism of Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. The first was about his research methodology, because it was relatively unstructured, which means that other researchers who were trying to replicate Piaget's experiments or validate his results could not do so. So Piaget's experimental results themselves were questioned. And this theory of cognitive development was based on his observations of his own 3 children. If he was observing his own children, then there is a possibility of bias. And the other children in Piaget's experiments were all from well-educated families of high socio-economic status. So while his theories might be correct for children coming from such backgrounds, what about children coming from other backgrounds? Do his theories hold good for children coming from, say, working class backgrounds? Now, that was also a question that was raised. And Piaget says that there are 4 stages of development: sensorimotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. And he also says that children display some aspects of development in each of these stages. However, other researchers said that some children possess many of these abilities at an earlier stage itself, or an earlier age itself. So, is Piaget's classification of these 4 different stages as per different ages, is that classification correct? Are those age groups correct? That was also a question that was raised by many researchers. And Vygotsky also criticized Piaget's theory. Vygotsky says that Piaget's theories don't take into account social and cultural influences on development. And Vygotsky also says that biological and cultural development are interlinked. That is, biological development cannot happen without cultural influences and vice versa. Next, let us look at Lev Vygotsky and his theories. Now, Vygotsky was a Soviet Russian psychologist. That is, he was from the communist Russia. And he is one of the proponents of the social constructivist school of thought. And his theories are based on 3 main things: society, culture, and language. And the key concepts that we will study under Lev Vygotsky's theory are his zone of proximal development, the concept of scaffolding, the concept of more knowledgeable other, and social speech, private speech, and silent inner speech. As per Vygotsky's theory, language plays a very, very important role in the construction of knowledge, or in the cognitive development of a child. Because language is not just a means of communication, it is also a way of processing the information that the child is getting. So it is a mean, and it is also a tool for processing the information. So language helps in social interactions. That is, when a child has to interact with his or her family, peers, teachers, community members, then language becomes very important. And language also plays a very important part in the cultural factors. That is, to understand about the religious beliefs, about customs and traditions, about moral values, about laws and rules. For all of these also, language is very, very important. Therefore, the 3 important factors which affect the cognitive development of a child are language, social interactions, and cultural factors. Another aspect of Vygotsky's theory is that he gave play a lot of importance in the cognitive development of children. He said that when children are playing, they get an opportunity to do a lot more than what they can do in their regular lives, because they can experiment with various types of interactions, they can make up rules, they can use symbols, and they can use their creativity during play. Therefore, play is extremely important in the cognitive development of a child. The next important concept in Vygotsky's theory is ZPD, or Zone of Proximal Development. Now, zone of proximal development consists of those activities that the student can do, but with some assistance. That is, there will be some activities that the student can do completely independently. They have already gained expertise in these activities. Then there will be some activities where the student has all the basic knowledge or has the basic skills. But to accomplish those tasks or do that work, the student needs some assistance or guidance or support. So those tasks fall under the zone of proximal development. And then there will be some tasks or some activities that the student cannot do at his or her current level. So they are future learning. Let me explain the concept of a zone of proximal development and how it evolves over the lifetime of a person using a small example. When you were a small child, the first thing that you learned was to run and walk. So running and walking were things that you could do independently. And you were just learning how to ride a bicycle. Therefore, you could ride a bicycle with some help, support and guidance. Therefore, riding a bicycle was in your zone of proximal development. You are not yet ready to ride a motorcycle. Therefore, that was in your future learning. After a few years, you could still walk and run independently. You could also ride a bicycle independently, and you are just learning how to ride a motorcycle. Therefore, riding a motorcycle is now in your zone of proximal development because you could ride a motorcycle with some help, support and guidance. And you are not yet ready to drive a car. Therefore, that is in your future learning. After a few more years, you can still walk and run independently. You can also ride a bicycle independently, and you can also ride a bike or a motorcycle independently. So these are all things that are already in your area of expertise. And you are learning how to drive a car. So you go to a driving school. So the driving instructor sits next to you and is teaching you how to drive a car. Therefore, you can drive a car, but with some help, support and guidance. So this is in your zone of proximal development. You are not yet ready to fly a plane. Therefore, that might be in your future learning. Therefore, at any stage in life, there are some things that we can do independently. And there will be some things which we can do with some help, support and guidance. And there will be a lot of activities or a lot of skills that are in our future learning. The next concept in Vygotsky's theory is scaffolding. Now, if you go to a construction site when they are about to pour concrete or when the concrete is still relatively freshly poured, then you can see that this kind of a framework is used to support the concrete. That is because the concrete is still not strong enough to support its own weight. Therefore, a temporary support is provided during the construction phase. So similarly, when a learner is learning something, then you provide some temporary support during the learning phase, because at that phase, the learner is still not capable of supporting himself or herself. Therefore, you provide some temporary support, help and guidance called scaffolding. So what is the connection between scaffolding and zone of proximal development? Well, as we discussed earlier, zone of proximal development is those activities which the student can do, but with some assistance. Therefore, the assistance that is provided to the student is nothing but scaffolding. Now, who gives scaffolding to the learner or to the child? Well, scaffolding can be provided by the parents, by other family members, by the teachers, by friends, and by community members. Whoever is providing this scaffolding must know more about that activity than the learner. Therefore, the other person who is providing the scaffolding is the more knowledgeable other. In a classroom, the teacher is the more knowledgeable other because the teacher knows more than the students. Vygotsky classifies speech into three different types. The first is social speech. So social speech is the normal speech that children use to communicate with everybody around them. And this starts from the age of 2 onwards. And then there is private speech, which typically starts from the age of 3 onwards. So private speech is not actually addressed or aimed at anybody else. So private speech is just a loud expression of the child's thoughts. So the child is speaking to himself or herself and giving self-guidance or self-regulation. Now, private speech becomes silent inner speech from the age of 7 onwards. Because from the age of 7, now the child is grown up and become more self-conscious, and the child doesn't want others to hear his or her thoughts. Therefore, the child is still using private speech and still using it for self-guidance and self-regulation. But the only difference is now the private speech has gone inside the person's brain and it has become silent. So silent inner speech can continue for the duration of the person's life, because even today I sometimes use silent inner speech when I'm giving instructions to myself or when I'm making a checklist for myself when I'm doing something. So silent inner speech can be used for the duration of the person's life. Vygotsky gives a lot of importance to play in the cognitive development of a child, and more specifically make-believe play, because he says that make-believe play helps in the development of symbolic thought and self-regulation. So first of all, what is this make-believe play? Make-believe play is where the child is pretending to be somebody else. The child might pretend to be a doctor or a policeman or a postman or a driver. And children are not just using their creativity in this make-believe play, they are also learning how to make rules and how to interact with each other. And make-believe play helps in the development of symbolic thoughts and self-regulation. So what is the symbolic thought? Well, symbolic thought is nothing but the ability to use words or images to make mental representations of real-world objects and to send and receive information. For example, if I say the word fire, then you are mentally imagining a fire in your mind. So you are using a mental image to understand what I am talking. And if I say fire, you can also use a word FIRE. Right? The words FIRE are not physically a fire, but those words are symbols to represent a fire. Therefore, when we use some words or images to represent some real world objects, like a tree, if I write TREE, that doesn't become a tree, but those words, those letters represent a tree. Therefore, I'm using a word or an image to represent a real world object. Therefore, symbolic thought is where we use some words or images to send and receive information to understand things. And then comes self-regulation. So self-regulation is a very simple concept. If you are able to sit in one place and watch this video for the duration without getting distracted, then you are practicing self-regulation. So now children are able to practice self-regulation to a small extent because children get distracted very easily. But still, if a child is able to sit in one place, especially during make-believe play, and do a particular task. For example, if the child is pretending to be a doctor, then the child is operating on a toy baby, and the child will play that game for a duration of maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes without getting distracted. Therefore, the child is practicing self-regulation through this make-believe play. Therefore, make-believe play helps in the cognitive development of a child through the development of symbolic thought and through self-regulation. Now, let us look at what are the criticisms of Vygotsky's theories. So the first one is that Vygotsky's theory does not give importance to the biological aspects of development. That is, Vygotsky constantly talks about SCL, that is social, cultural and linguistic aspects of development. But what about the biological aspect? Because if the biological aspects don't develop, that is, if the brain doesn't develop, then the social development, the cultural development and the linguistic development, all of them will get affected. But Vygotsky's theory does not touch upon biological development. Therefore, it is incomplete. Next, ZPD does not explain the process of development. That is, ZPD is a very good concept to understand how people learn. But ZPD does not fully explain the process of development. Therefore, that is also considered to be incomplete. And the socio-cultural theory disregards the role of the individual, but regards the collective. Because Vygotsky constantly talks about social and cultural aspects of learning. Where does the individual come in? Because even without too much of a social or cultural inputs, an individual is still capable of learning some things. But Vygotsky's theory does not focus on that because he's constantly looking at the social and the cultural aspects only. And then Vygotsky's theory also does not explain how gifted students or child prodigies come into being. That is, a gifted student is somebody who's more expert at something than the other people around him. His parents might not be experts, his friends or his colleagues or his teachers might not be experts, but this gifted student has learned something beyond what can be explained in a social or a cultural context, because all the people around him know less about that than the child. So how did the child learn that? Therefore, if you are trying to explain that in a socio-cultural context, it doesn't happen. Next, Vygotsky's socio-cultural theory apparently does not apply to some social and cultural groups. This is what researchers do say. Therefore, Vygotsky's theory has been mainly criticized because it is incomplete in some aspects, such as the biological aspects. Now, let us do a quick comparison of Piaget and Vygotsky's theories. Piaget's theory gives very little emphasis or importance to the socio-cultural aspects of development, whereas Vygotsky gives a very strong importance to socio-cultural aspects. Piaget's theory is called cognitive constructivist theory because he's paying more attention or is giving more attention to the individual, whereas Vygotsky's theory is social constructivist, whereas he is giving more importance to the social aspects of learning. And Piaget's theory follows some stages, that is, he looks at 4 different stages of development, whereas Vygotsky does not have any specific stages. So he says that development happens due to social context, that is, if the child is getting more social and cultural inputs, then the development happens faster, whereas if the child is getting very little social interaction, then the development is slower. So he doesn't talk about any stages. And next, Piaget says that the child is a lone scientist, that is, he develops a lot of knowledge through his own exploration, through his own experiments, through his own experience, whereas Vygotsky says that a lot of learning happens through social interactions and the child learns a few things from others and builds on top of that knowledge. And Piaget says that thought, that is cognitive development, drives language. So he says that cognitive development comes first and then language development happens, whereas Vygotsky talks about it the other way around. He says that language is more important because language is the means through which the children are receiving information and also processing information. Therefore, language comes first and it drives cognitive development. And the last one is the role of the teacher. Piaget says that the teacher should just provide opportunities for children to learn about the world for themselves. That is, he talks about discovery learning, where the teachers are relatively hands-off and they allow the child to experiment and learn things on his or her own. Whereas Vygotsky uses the concept of ZPD, where he says that the teachers should provide that scaffolding or support. He talks about assisted learning, where children learn through the assistance provided by the teacher. So these are the differences between Piaget and Vygotsky's theories. Next, let us discuss about Lawrence Kohlberg. So Lawrence Kohlberg was an American psychologist. He was a follower of the constructivist approach, and he is well known for his theory of stages of moral development. And to remember this theory, you can use this shortcut, that is SS, because usually students get confused on how many stages were there and how many levels are there in this theory. So you can say that there were 3 levels and in each level there were 2 stages. So there were 6 stages in the theory of moral development. So SS. Kohlberg's moral development theory just tries to explain how children learn to take moral decisions, how the process of taking moral decisions evolves. What are moral decisions? Well, moral decisions are nothing but a situation where a person or a child has to decide between a right and a wrong. It can be very serious or it can be very trivial. Say, if I'm walking on a road and I see some money on the road. So, should I pick it up or no? That is a moral decision. After I pick it up, should I just keep it in my pocket or should I hand it over to the police? That is also a moral decision. So, in our daily life, we take a lot of moral decisions. So, Kohlberg's stages of moral development theory just tries to explain how this process of taking moral decisions evolves over the period of a person's life. Kohlberg divides moral development into 3 levels. The first is pre-conventional, then conventional, and finally post-conventional. And because each of these levels have 2 stages, so there are 6 stages in total. In stage 1, children are taking moral decisions on the basis of avoiding punishment, because they know that if they do the wrong thing, then they will get punished by their parents or teachers. Therefore, they are just trying to avoid punishment when they are taking a moral decision. In stage 2, children are now expecting a reward. If they do the right thing, they are expecting that somebody will reward them. For example, if they clean up their room, then they are expecting that their parents might give them a reward, maybe a chocolate. Or if they help somebody, then they might be expecting an ice cream or some such reward. Therefore, expectation of a reward is driving the moral decisions in stage 2. In stage 3, children are now looking for others' approval. That is, if they do the right thing, they are expecting that they will be called a good boy or a good girl by others. And that is driving their moral decisions. In stage 4, they are just obeying the law and order. By now, they are old enough to understand that there are some laws and rules and regulations that they have to follow. So just because the law says something or the rule says something, they are just following the rules or the laws that they have to follow. So their moral decisions are based on the type of rules or laws or regulations that they have to follow. And next comes stage 5, where you're talking about social good and social contract, because by now the person has grown up and he or she has a lot of friends and is interacting with the society. So the person thinks that I will do something which is right because that is the way I expect others to do. So there is a social contract, because if I do something which is wrong and others also start doing the same thing, then the society will not be a right place. Therefore, I will do the right thing and I will expect others also to do the right thing. So that is stage 5. And stage 6 is where we are talking about the universal principles of ethics and moral principles. That is, at this stage, people are quite old and they are talking about things like pap and punya. So here, irrespective of what others might be doing, not doing, they want to do the right thing because they are following the universal principles of ethics and moral principles. Just like any other theory, even Kohlberg's theory of moral development has been criticized on various aspects. For example, his research methodology has been criticized because they say that during his research, the team used very artificial and hypothetical situations. That is, they were asking questions like, if you are in this kind of a situation, what will you do? If you are faced with this kind of a dilemma, what will you do? So these were very artificial and hypothetical situations which the people might or might not be able to relate to, and there is no way to verify whether the answer that they are giving is something that they would be actually doing in real life. Therefore, the research methodology has been questioned. Then there is a possible gender bias because all the participants who participated in Kohlberg's research group were male participants. So would female participants have answered the questions differently? So that might be a cause for gender bias. And in real life, people define what is right or wrong separately, depending on the situation. For example, a child knows that it is wrong to steal. But what if the child is very, very hungry? Then the child might justify that it is okay to steal only this time because I'm very, very hungry. So what people define as right or wrong will depend on the particular situation and the context. And finally, moral judgment may not always match moral behavior. That is, when you are giving artificial and hypothetical dilemmas or situations to people, what will you do if you are in this kind of a situation? Then I might have a judgment that this is the right thing, that is the wrong thing. However, will I actually behave in the same way? That is the question. Therefore, these are all the aspects due to which Kohlberg's theory of moral development has been criticized. Now, let us solve some questions from previous question papers. The first one is Vygotsky emphasized the significance of the role played by which of the following factors in the learning of children. So we are talking about Vygotsky here, and Vygotsky's theory is all about S, C and L. That is social, cultural and linguistic factors. When we look at the answer choices, the first one says social, so this has to be the correct answer. As a teacher who firmly believes in the social constructivist theory of Lev Vygotsky, which of the following methods would you prefer for assessing your students? When we are talking about the social constructivist theory, this theory says that a lot of learning happens through social interactions. Therefore, social interactions have to be part of the teaching and learning process. Therefore, even the assessment process should have some social interaction in it. Now, when you look at all the answer choices, the first one, standardized tests. If students are taking standardized tests, then there is not much of a social interaction happening because this is individual activity. Therefore, this cannot be the answer choice. Next, fact-based recall questions. If children are memorizing some facts and using them or answering questions based on them in exams, this also does not require too much of social interaction, right? This also can be taken out. Objective multiple choice type questions. This is a type of question, and when you're answering such questions, you don't need social interaction. Therefore, eliminate this. And the last one, collaborative projects. So if the students are collaborating with each other, then there is social interaction that is happening. Therefore, this has to be the correct answer. According to Piaget, At which of the following stages does a child begin to think logically about abstract propositions? That is, at what age does the child develop the ability to solve abstract problems? Now, if you remember Piaget's theory of cognitive development and the 4 stages, we see that in the 4th stage, that is the formal operational stage, that is when the child develops the ability to engage in abstract thought. And we are talking about abstract propositions here. Therefore, the correct answer is formal operational stage, which is 11 years and above. According to Piaget's stages of cognitive development, the sensorimotor stage is associated with which of the following? Now, sensorimotor stage is the first stage, which is from 0 to 2 years. At this stage, are children thinking about social issues? No. Do children have the ability to solve problems in a logical fashion? No. And do children have the ability to interpret and analyze options? No, because we are talking about a child who is less than 2 years old. Therefore, the correct answer here is the simplest among the 4 options. That is, the child can imitate, and the child is learning how to remember things, and the child is also trying to represent things mentally. That is, when the child sees something or hears something, then the child is trying to associate it with a person or a thing. Therefore, the correct answer here is option 2. In the context of Kohlberg's stages of moral reasoning, under which stage would the typical response of the child fall? That is, your parents will be proud of you if you are honest. So you should be honest. So what is happening here is the child should be honest just because the parents will be happy and they will call him or her a good boy. Therefore, if you look at the options, we are talking about a good girl or a good boy orientation. With that, we come to the end of this video. If you have any questions or feedback, please post them in the comment section below. And the rest, you know what to do. So I will see you again very soon in the next part of this video series. Till then, take care, stay safe.